Okay, I think I'm going to get started because it's 12 noon right now. We have a full hour for this event. But I am going to be keeping an eye on the attendees, and there will be, I'm sure, people trickling in over the next, 5-10 minutes. Welcome everyone who's already with us. My name is Sarah Walco. I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Visual Arts Center of New Jersey. And I want to start our meeting here today by saying that we gratefully acknowledge the Lenape peoples on whose ancestral homelands the Visual Arts Center of New Jersey is situated. We honor the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. And we're really thrilled to have Karelle Hall with us today. This event is basically in conjunction with the closing of our exhibition that opened in the fall. It was called The First Body is the Water, or The First Water is the Body, excuse me. And it was guest curated by Maria Hupfield. So this talk is in conjunction with that exhibition for the closing event. Another quick housekeeping things. We have the chat open and the Q&A open. So Karelle's going to give her talk, but if you have questions throughout, feel free to put them in either of those, and we will definitely be getting to everyone's questions at the end. Okay, so I would like to introduce our speaker for this talk. Karelle Hall is a Ph.D. candidate in anthropology at Rutgers University. And she received her bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College in anthropology with a minor in Native American studies. Her dissertation research explores embodied and distributed Lenape diasporic sovereignty in public and performative spaces. She has taught classes in both cultural and linguistic anthropology at Rutgers University and has presented her preliminary research at conferences. As a member of the Nanticoke Indian Tribe, she has represented her nation at numerous events as both a speaker and a dancer. And we were fortunate enough too at the Visual Arts Center when we opened our exhibitions to have her join us as a dancer as well last fall. She is actively working on Nanticoke language revitalization, including writing a children's book and developing lessons for community classes. Using her experience and connections in the legal field, she assisted the Nanticoke Tribe with ratifying their recognition in the state of Delaware. She continues to work as an activist and a representative for her community, promoting visibility, decolonization, and education. So we're really thrilled you could join us here today, Karelle. And yeah, if you would like to go ahead and begin your presentation.
Absolutely. All right. We canal wilchmo. Karelle Delawens, Nantukoni. It's good to see all of you. My name is Karelle Hall, and I am Nanticoke and a PhD candidate at Rutgers University. Today, I'm going to share with you a little about Nanticoke and Lenape history and revitalization and the significance of water. So first, I'd like to ground us in a brief geography and history of Lenape Hoking, which means land of the Lenape. Pre-colonial Lenape Hoking was not one single political nation, but made up of fluid sovereignties between communities connected by shared kinship, history, culture, territory, political affiliations, and language. So on the left-hand side here, you will see a pre-colonial land of the Lenape that is shaded in green. And the different shades of color represent the languages or dialects that are spoken of Lenape. So the light green in the north is the Munsee dialect, whereas the middle band is the Unalaktuko dialect, and the dark band at the bottom is the Unami dialect. Their territory is surrounded by water. You have the ocean and bays, large rivers, particularly the Delaware River, which is where they also get their English name. Many of you may know the Lenape as the Delawares, but Lenape is the name that they use for themselves. And on the right-hand side, there's a map of the pre-colonial Nanticoke territory that's in the Delmarva Peninsula. And you can see that their territory is clustered around the Nanticoke River and its tributaries. The Nanticoke people trace their ancient history to the Lenape, and they share similar cultural practices and languages. The word Nanticoke means people of the Tidewater. These rivers, bays, and waterways were lifelines and connected the people. These waters were also the sites of first contact with the colonial settlers sailing from Europe. On the left here, you can see that the Munsee Lenape people first encountered Verrazano in 1524 when he sailed into New York Bay. And then the Nanticokes encountered John Smith when his party rode up the Nanticoke River in 1608. And you can see the image on the right, there is a place there called Phillips Landing where they believe is approximately where that first contact took place. These initial moments of contact were followed by wave after wave of settlers arriving, not looking to live in Lenapehoking, but instead looking to carve out their own territory, to replace Lenapehoking and its people with their new colonies. The Nanticoke and Lenape, along with other nations that encountered these newcomers, not yet knowing their intent, treated them as refugees and immigrants, creating treaties and trade agreements with them, seeking to fold them into the current political structures and practices that already existed. And one way that they did this was through Wampum and Wampum Belt treaties. So firstly, wampum is made from clamshells that are found all along the East Coast, but particularly clustered in the Northeast. Many coastal Algonquin communities collect these shells and turn them into beads that can be strung into single strands or woven into belts like the one pictured here. The strings of wampum are used for ceremonial and political purposes. They're used to accompany important messages or agreements or teachings, and they add the weight of sincerity to them. The woven belts were often used as treaties between different nations. The white and purple beads were assembled to create a message and a living representation of the agreements. The colonial settlers were folded into the system of wampum belt treaties, and many treaties that were created between them at this time were done by pairing both written documents with wampum belts. The belt pictured here is the Penn Treaty Belt from approximately 1682 or 1683. This treaty was created between William Penn and Lenape chief Tamanin at Shakamoxon, which is today Philadelphia. The belt depicts the Lenape and the English together in friendship, and the diagonal purple bands that you see represent the significant rivers of the territory. Many more treaties were signed and wampum belts were exchanged, but political relationships continued to decline as settlers became increasingly set on domination. Some land exchanges were done through walking purchases, which is an agreement where territory is ceded as far as a man can walk in a day, or whatever specific amount that was agreed. So in 1737, the sons of William Penn decided to take advantage of this practice, and when they negotiated a walking purchase, they decided to hire sprinters to cover the distance much faster than a man could walk. And they cleared the brush from the trail so that they could run faster, and put rafts near the rivers so that they could cross them faster, all in an attempt to get more land from the Lenape than was agreed upon. So as the settlers' greed for land continued to grow across Lenapehoking, many Nanticoke and Lenape communities forged new political alliances, both with each other and with other communities, including the Six Nations, who you may know as the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois, to keep hold of their land and ways of life. And they used these rivers as highways and networks to connect them to their neighbors. Both prior to contact and through the colonial period, large towns and centers of trade could be found all along the big rivers, such as the Susquehanna. And Wyalusing was one of these towns, as this marker here on the right indicates. And the image on the left is an image of the Susquehanna. And as the Lenape people were first further north and west due to colonial expansion, they continued to rely on their rivers, finding new homes along them. But after more than a century of conflict and land theft, they were compelled to agree to reservations as one way to preserve their homes. Now, many of you may be familiar with the concept of Indian reservations that exist in the western part of this country, but what many people don't realize is that there were also reservations here in the East. There was a Lenape reservation in New Jersey, and there were Nanticoke reservations in Maryland and Delaware. So these reservations would be small tracts of land, usually within their original territory that was reserved for them. And so this first image is the Chacon Reservation that was created along the Nanticoke River and sits in what is today Vienna, Maryland. And so this reservation is no longer in the hands of the Nanticoke people. Today, it actually holds a colonial historic museum and also includes a reconstructed Nanticoke wigwam and garden, and is used as an educational site. There are some members of our Nanticoke community who work with this museum and are growing medicines in the gardens on our ancestral lands. A second reservation that we had was the Broad Creek Reservation, which is along the Broad Creek, which is a tributary of the Nanticoke River. This reservation sits in what is today Laurel, Delaware. And today, this site holds a public park and playground that have been recently dedicated to the Nanticoke people and their history. So the new playground that is still under construction, actually, it features elements such as a turtle sandbox or beaver climbing station and slide. Each of those elements includes a station where you can listen and hear a recorded native story that's told partially in English and partially in the Nanticoke language. I was able to personally collaborate on this project and to help provide the Nanticoke vocabulary for this park. Our last reservation was the Indian River Reservation along the Indian River, which is now in today's Millsboro, Delaware. And this area is actually where most of the Nanticoke people still reside today, and where our tribal center and the seat of our tribal government still sits. So these tracts of land that were set aside as reservations, although at the time they were large enough to hold the villages of the Nanticoke people, they weren't large enough to include their necessities for hunting and other practices that they needed to maintain their lives. So you'd have people leaving on hunting trips or other short-term travels, and they'd return to find squatters that were on their lands. And then colonial governments who were refusing to enforce these agreements. And so by the mid to late 1700s, with the reservations being snatched out from under them, relations between the colonizers and the native people had completely deteriorated. And so many Nanticoke and Lenape people were forced westward and northward. And this map just shows broadly their movement. So some of them went to Oklahoma, others went to Wisconsin, and others to Ontario, and some to Six Nations. And today, there are federally recognized Lenape communities in those spaces. So there are 2 federally recognized communities in Oklahoma. There is 1 in Wisconsin and 2 in Ontario, along with Nanticoke and Lenape people who were folded into the Six Nations. However, not everyone left their homelands, and those that stayed carved out a resilient existence on the edges of the ever-expanding colonial empire. The people who stayed gathered together and organized into tightly knitted communities that have worked to maintain their sovereignty and today are recognized by the states that they reside in. In Delaware, there are 2 state-recognized tribal communities. You have the Lenape Indian Tribe of Delaware and the Nanticoke Indian Tribe. And in New Jersey, there are 3 recognized communities: the Ramapo Lenape Indian Nation, the Powhatan Lenape Nation, and the Nanticoke Lenape Tribal Nation. And particularly the Nanticoke Lenape and the 2 tribes in Delaware form a very tight kinship network. There are individuals from each of these 3 communities who have intermarried with each other to the point where these 3 communities, although still maintaining politically distinct communities, are one large extended family. So today, our communities that stayed are still living by important waterways and continuing to practice those traditional relationships with the water, including fishing and other activities. So on the left-hand side is the Cohansey River, which is in South Jersey, and it's near where the Nanticoke Lenape live. The individuals from this community still use this river all of the time, and fried fish caught from this river is often a staple at many community gatherings. And on the right-hand side is an image of Indian River Bay, where the Nanticoke community is residing today, and they also continue to have close relationships and interactions with this water. The expanding wave, however, of new residential and commercial construction in southern Delaware threatens these local ecosystems. We live closely beside these waterways and fight to protect them. Native people are at the forefront of many environmental movements to protect water against oil pipelines and other forms of pollution that threaten our access to clean water. But not just our access. Every being on the planet needs clean water. In New Jersey, so much of the water is polluted, with homes and businesses often requiring strong filtration systems to make it drinkable. Our access to wampum, those sacred clamshells that are so vital to our history and ongoing ceremonies, are becoming harder to find. Their populations are diminishing, and fewer clams reach the maturity that's needed to produce those wampum beads. Their scarcity reflects the environmental crisis of both pollution and global warming. And in 2016, Nanticoke and Lenape people from our East Coast communities traveled to Standing Rock in South Dakota to stand with the Lakota in their fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, a pipeline that would run through their land and threaten their water. Mini-Wachoni in Lakota means water is life, and the animacy of the world around us is reflected in the language of our activism. Water is life. The land and water are not resources to be controlled for the power and profit of a few. Water is life, and water is alive. As we work to reclaim our languages in the face of centuries of genocide, we are also working to reclaim the worldviews and teachings that are embedded within those languages. So one example of this is the concept of animacy. Our Western view of animacy places it in a hierarchy of people first, and then right below that, animals that we know, such as pets, that may be granted limited personhood, and those animate pronouns that we use for people, such as he, she, and they. However, underneath that, we have other animals, and then we have plants that we consider to be alive, but not animate, and then water that is not generally considered alive or animate. And the inanimate pronoun it is used frequently for these animals, plants, and water. However, the Lenape recognize far more of their world to be animate and without that hierarchy of consciousness. And this is visible within the structures of the language. The same pronouns used for animate humans are also used for animate animals, plants, water, and celestial bodies. So how does this change our worldview when we recognize more beings with animacy, when we recognize their personhood? Those ways of seeing the world and the ancestral teachings about how to walk in a good way are embedded in the languages, and just one of the reasons that it's so important for us to revitalize them. Languages are more than just words. They carry values, morals, beliefs. My work on Nanticoke language revitalization is one way that I work to begin to heal the trauma of that ongoing violent colonial history. From the early colonial erasure of place names, with Lenape becoming places like New York and New Jersey, and the destruction of our communities, to the more contemporary federal practices such as the boarding school era that deprived generations of children from learning their tribal languages. Today, we are bringing our Nanticoke language back to our communities where it hasn't been spoken in several generations. Our grandparents never had the chance to speak it, but our children will be able to learn it. Munsee and Unami speakers are also working hard to create new generations of speakers in their communities across that Lenape diaspora and across Turtle Island, which is what we call North America. And so on the screen here are some words in our language for water. So in Nanticoke, the way that we say water is nip. And in Unami and Munsee, it's B, although they have different spelling systems in each of their communities. And then the image on the left is also showing the words for water in many different indigenous languages. And the phrase, "we are water," expresses that water is a part of us, an integral part. Water is alive. It has memory. Long before Elsa from Frozen sang about it, Indigenous people have known that water carries memories. This past October, I took part in a water ceremony on Randall's Park Island in New York City as part of an Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. For this ceremony, Lenape cousin tribal communities such as the Shinnecock, Matinecock, Unkachog, Ramapo, and Nanticoke came together with other friends and allies in Lenape Hoking. People brought water from their local rivers and waterways, some as far away as Hawaii. My cousin and I held water from the Brandywine River in northern Delaware, the river that you can see an image of on the left-hand side. And on the right, you see the water that was collected that we held in the jar for that ceremony. We know that the waters surrounding New York City are some of the most polluted today, but this hasn't always been the case and doesn't have to be the future. As we stood there on the banks of that river, we said our prayers for cleaner water and for healthier ecosystems. We asked the water to remember us and to remember the history. We poured our waters into the rivers surrounding the island as a reminder of how the waters are all connected and how they connect us as people and how they carry memories of the past and our hopes for the future. Wanishi, thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Karelle. I am pulling up the opening questions. Oh, Mary says, so moving. Great presentation.
Nishi.
Okay, so I'm going to wait for a bit to see if anyone has questions coming in. Meanwhile, I have some questions, so I was going to start with mine. First of all, I'm curious about the children's book and the community lessons that you're working on. Could you tell us a little bit more about them? And are they directly tied to your research for your PhD?
Yes, I would love to talk a little bit about that. So this has been a project of love that is a few years old, but we are actually almost at the point where we are ready to introduce this book to the world. So we're hoping to go to print at the end of next month.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's really exciting. But so this book is a introduction to the Nanticoke language. It's written as a children's chapter book, and each chapter has an introduction section of some commonly used words and phrases that people can incorporate into their lives. So there's a section on greetings. There's one on family terms. There's one on food and animals and counting and colors. And within that book, we're also including not just the words, but some of those other teachings that I said, because language goes beyond words. And so one example of that is in the family page, when we are learning the words for siblings. We also tell them that not only are these the words for your, we have words for older siblings and words for younger siblings, but the words for siblings are the same words that we use for our cousins. And so this really reflects the way that we see our families and organize our families. Our siblings are our cousins. We call them all the same thing. So it shows those, it traces those connections. So the Nanticoke language, just to give a little context, doesn't have any first language speakers as of today, and we haven't since about the mid-1800s. We have a handful of small dictionaries, which are mostly vocabulary lists that were collected in the 1700s, some that were commissioned by Thomas Jefferson, others that were by a person known as Heckfelder. And so, people ask this question, like, how do you revitalize a language where you only have, say like 300 or so, vocabulary words from the 1700s that are spelled all types of ways by people who aren't familiar with that language, and you don't currently have any, first language speakers today. And so, they're like, how do you do that? Like, how can you bring that language back? What do you do? But so one thing that we can do is that we can rely on the language family. And so it's called the Algonquin language family. Many Lenape speakers argue that maybe it ought to be called the Lenape language family, because not just because we're centering ourselves in it, but like the Lenape people are generally considered to be the grandfathers of other Algonquin communities, so that being the oldest community and from which a lot of these sort of eastern coastal communities sprang from. And so like the Nanticoke people, we also agree that we descended in our ancient history from the Lenape. And so you can lean on that language family because the languages are so similar, the grammar structures are similar, and you have enough of your language to us to see and trace those, the sound shifts and the things that sort of change and shift between each language. We are working with a wonderful linguist who has been helping with some of those reconstructions, because you can either borrow words that you don't have from other languages, or you can see what the other communities have as their word for the thing, and then you can reconstruct it based on what you know of Nanticoke. And so we've been doing kind of a combination of that to reconstruct Nanticoke. And we're really excited about the project. So the book should hopefully be ready by the end of next month or early March. And then our next steps after that are to create sort of an online database or dictionary so that people can, so we can sort of expand on that and people can, look up words and phrases in that way. And then to hold community lessons either in person or Zoom or some type of hybrid, depending on what the world looks like, the pandemic looks like in the future, where we can take each one of those chapters, because each one of them is like an introduction. Like in the counting page, we give people the numbers 1 through 10. We have more numbers though. And so in those lessons, we want to expand on it and to teach them, more of these, to teach them, more food items, more family terms, and to, just keep expanding the project.
So it's a children's book, but it's kind of for everyone.
Yeah, it's for children ages, what's the song, 1 to 92,
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like a really amazing learning tool for any age.
Yes.
That's so exciting. Another question I had for you is you had brought up you brought up Standing Rock and activism around water, and also that beautiful water ceremony that you attended. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit. I'm just curious about your own participation around activism.
Yeah, so I have definitely, like, physically, I did not physically go to Standing Rock. I wasn't able to do that particular travel, although we did have, people from our communities going there to support that. I have, living so close to DC, I have attended, different marches and protests, sort of that boots on the ground type of protesting in DC. But also, when I think that some of my biggest activism is through my words. And so, I go and I give talks. I gave a talk at our annual anthropology conference in 2019, in the before times, before COVID, on a specific, that paper was specifically on water, actually, and just about the activism around it and how we can use our own like indigenous ideologies and worldviews and the ways that we see and talk about water to help sort of shape and frame our actions and our work for activism. I also have been working closely with the Lenape community, the Lenape Indian Tribe of Delaware that's located in central Delaware in a town called Cheswold. I worked with them last year. The work is still continuing. It's just a little cold out to do some of the outdoor work right now. But last summer and spring, I was working with them to clear land in an area that has a part of the area are cemeteries, and then there is a sort of a wetland area. And so we've been working to clear debris and trash from that space. The cemeteries are actually, it's a Lenape cemetery, and it's holding many of our community members in it. But the wetlands and the area around it have been sort of used as this like dumping ground by the city. And so we've really been working to, clear that land, and also to, the next steps in that will be to reintroduce oysters, I believe. I had to think about that for a second, whether mussels or oysters, to that, back into that stream where they would have been living before, to help really clean up those waterways and to sort of protect our local ecosystems. So, activism on different fronts and in lots of different ways.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We do have a question from Kit in the audience. She says, I would love to know any resources available to learn about who lived in my area of South Jersey, Cape May-ish, and how the land and water was used. I'm trying to center my art around learning and respecting and perhaps enlightening others about how and who were the originators in this area.
Wonderful. Thank you for your interest in wanting to learn more. So if you're in South Jersey in that Cape May area, you're really close to the Nanticoke and Lenape tribal community. They have a tribal website, so if you Google them, it should be the first thing that pops up, or hopefully, but you should be able to see it sort of at the top of the search list, and that will link you to a bit about them as a people and their history, their politics and museum, and also like contact information, because there are many people from that community who are working in various ways to either preserve local traditions, or to create art, or to create educational materials. I'm actually working on a project right now with the Trent House Museum that is working to create educational videos that can be sort of distributed to schools. So we're thinking upper elementary, middle school, high school is sort of the target age range that we're looking at. And so we're creating a series of videos that are telling people about the both the pre-colonial history, this whole ongoing colonial period, who we are today, the ways in which our struggles, our challenges, the ways in which we are, seen by the media, our politics, really trying to elevate that discussion around Native America and really to add some more depth to it.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like you have a lot of things that you're taking part in and participating in.
Yeah.
Do you have, first I wanted to just quickly follow up, where will we or in the audience be able to access your book and any events you have coming up? How can we kind of keep following your work?
Yes, I can write in the chat the contact email we've set up for the book. We are going to be promoting it. It will be available once it's ready. It will be available for anyone to purchase. It's not only for tribal members to purchase. As far as exactly the mechanics of where it will be on sale, that I don't have that information yet. However, I do encourage you to, I think our Nanticoke Indian Tribe will help us to promote it. So we have a Facebook page that promotes events, Nanticoke Indian Tribe, working on a better Instagram presence. Also, the Nanticoke Indian Tribal website is also a place where I hope we're going to be able to promote that information and provide you with that. And then if you have specific questions, I'm going to go ahead and type that. Everyone can see the chat, right? Okay, so yeah. I'll put the email address that we've attached, that we've created for the book project. And so you can send us an email through that if you have, specific questions or interest.
Okay, perfect. And we can also post it, like when we post this recording. So someone did ask, will this recording be available to those who are unable to attend? Yes, definitely. We're recording it so that we will have access. We'll post it probably within a few days at the Art Center website and YouTube page. Also, someone says, many thanks to you, Karelle, for this insightful presentation, all of your work, dedication, and commitment to the Nanticoke Indian Tribe, as well as our sister tribes. So much appreciation. And let me check one more thing. I think I don't see any other questions. So I think we can wrap up early. If there's anything that you wanted to add.
I would just say that I really do, I thank you for being part of this discussion. I thank everyone for their interest. And, I encourage you to keep learning more and to keep, wanting to know more about, the Native people whose land that you live on. A lot of times you will see organizations, including this one, where they'll do a land acknowledgement of the land of the Native peoples whose land that their organizations are on. And I also encourage you to, in addition to, saying these words about acknowledging our,